All right, guys, if you are somebody who is looking to correct your slice, there is one fundamental movement, in my opinion, you can do that will go a long way to benefiting virtually all of you. You know, you hear a lot about fundamentals to the golf swing, right? Most people in the older days used to talk about the setup, the ball position, the grip type, and of course, those things will affect the golf swing. I do believe there's one thing that most people can do that right off the bat would help them to straighten out not only the path, but also get the club face in a stronger position. You know, if you're somebody who slices the ball more often than not, you're either going to have one of two struggles, potentially both. First one gets the club face too open, right? Golfers who come in way too open, the ball's going to start way off to the right in my case as a righty. Or they're going to then cut across the ball to try to close the club face. It's like a subconscious reaction, and that could lead to a path that gets way too far across the ball. So the whole purpose of this video is actually to talk to you about the lead wrist. So the lead wrist as a right-handed golfer would be my left wrist, the one that has the glove on it, and how it moves in transition and how this can benefit so many of you. You know, we have the advantage now where there's a lot of things that have been tested in 3D, and a large majority of tour players are doing this specific movement that we're going to talk about. So most people who struggle, right, what you will typically see with that lead wrist is the knuckles of the hand on the way down will start to hinge up above the forearm. What that basically means is that wrist angle will go from a flatter position, so one where you can think of like the hand and the palm of the hand forms a straight line with your forearm, and then into the transition, the knuckles will hinge upwards. So the wrist effectively is cupping on the way down. Why is this so bad for so many of you? Well, because no matter where the club is in space, no matter what the club face looks like, if in transition my lead wrist is going to work towards a cupped position, not only will this influence the shaft towards a steeper pattern, obviously we know steep for the most part is a death sentence for a lot of you, you're going to have to find a way to compensate for it a lot later on in the golf swing, but also you can see when this wrist cups out, how the club face gets a lot more open. So on the way down into this golf ball, you're going to see the shaft get very steep. You're going to see the shaft angle get very narrow in relation to my chest. You can actually see this here. And then you will see the club face get very open. So many bad things are happening that are going to penalize you. So this is why I actually consider this more of a fundamental than a lot of setup stuff, is because so many of you can improve with a change to what the wrist is doing on the way down. So obviously, it goes without saying, I want you to be doing the opposite. So rather than having this wrist angle go from a flatter position to one that is much more cupped on the way down like this, I want the wrist to be doing the inverse. So what's the inverse? Taking those knuckles and actually curling them underneath the forearm on the way down into the ball. Why is this so beneficial? Well, because number one, if you just think of where the shaft is in space, as these knuckles curl under the forearm this way, so the wrist is bowing or getting more flexed, you will see that I'm going to apply a force to the shaft that's actually going to help me to shallow the club. Obviously, this is very beneficial because shallowing the club is going to help the club head to swing more from the inside of the ball. It's also going to create a precedent that will allow my body to be able to move better. There's so many different advantages to this. But then also, if I get this lead wrist in transition to actually work towards a flatter position, what happens to my club face? It doesn't even matter so much if the club face is wide open at the top of the swing. If I do this on the way down, I'm effectively closing this club face. So obviously I'm showing it to you here just to give you a clear visual, but if we're at the top of the backswing and the wrist is somewhat cupped and the club face is open, it's not even so bad as long as this lead wrist on the way down is curling under the forearm. So you can see the knuckles of this hand is actually flexing, right? Well, if I were to do that on the way down into this golf ball, what you will start to see is that my shaft is going to shallow a lot better and my club face progressively is getting more closed. There are many of you out there who would just benefit from having the lead wrist in a flatter position at the top and then retaining it. You know, some people prefer when they're working on swing changes, and I see this a lot in my lessons where if I just got the club face more closed and the wrist flatter at the start and then kind of retained it through the golf swing, they would find that a lot easier. That's totally okay, but not everybody needs to do that. A lot of you, like I said, can work on that movement on the way down, because even if you are somebody who's going to get the wrist in a flatter spot on the way back, I would much rather you actually keep that at the top and not lose it, right? There's no benefit to getting the wrist angle in that flatter position, getting the club face closed here, so that stronger element that we want, if on the way up and then in transition you're going to lose it. All of the work of what you did prior to that is kind of gone out the window, right? It's thrown out, it's useless. So in this case, I'm preferring to see the lead wrist flatten in the transition some amount because of the force it's going to apply to the club because of the club face. So what are some simple ways to do this? Well, I'm a big believer of doing what we call dry rehearsals, which basically means rehearsals where we don't have a golf ball. Sometimes we don't even have a club in our hands. You know, it's winter time right now for many of you here. You can actually benefit from working on something like this where you don't even need to be outdoors or actually hitting balls on a driving range. Take your two hands, put them together. You go to the top of your backswing, and then as you start to transition down, so as you're transferring your weight and working on rotating the same way you normally would when you hit a ball, I want you to feel as though that lead wrist is bowing down a lot more. So it's going to feel like as that's happening, the trail wrist is bending back some amount. It might feel like the elbow is tucking in front or on the side of the body. That's okay. But the priority is really through the glove hand and almost feeling like we're applying a force downwards this way. So the knuckles of this hand curling under the forearm. So when I put my two hands together and I go to the top, I'm applying that force on the way down. So I'm really, of course, there is a little bit of a timing component to this at first. So a lot of people might do it a little prematurely. Some people might do it a little too late. That's totally okay. As you get more and more reps, you're going to feel that timing a little bit smoother. But you are going to have to manipulate a little bit at first if you're somebody whose lead wrist goes the other way. The reason why I say we tested so many people is because there are very, very few tour players who have the lead wrist actually working towards a cup position on the way down. Obviously, famously, the most common or popular name that shows up is Will Zalatoris is somebody who does that. His wrist is on the flatter side at the top, and then it cups on the way down. But he compensates for it in other ways, and most people do not have the skill set that he has to repeat that from one swing to the next. I would just much prefer for the lead wrist to move the same way of the majority of tour players because of all of these benefits that we're referring to, not just because of the association to pro golf, of course. And so once you get that feeling with those two hands on the club, right, I can even do this where I'm just holding the club in between the palm of my hands and I'm just trying to create that sensation. And then I can put my two hands on the club and try to recreate that. So I'm going to go up, try to recreate that sensation. I'm going to go up, try to recreate that sensation. And again, every single time I do this, you can see my shaft shallows and my club face gets more close. So if I'm going to hit a golf ball over here, of course we are exaggerating. So what does that mean? When you're exaggerating, the goal isn't necessarily to hit perfect shots. The goal is to see an opposite of your usual tendency. This is a very specific move that's going to help golfers to swing more from the inside, but also close the club face. So if you're cutting across the ball or your face is open, it's going to help you to straighten it out. If you exaggerate it enough, you might hit a few hooks. Oftentimes at first when we are working on this, you'll see golfers hook the ball quite a bit. But don't get scared if you do that. It's a good sign. It means something is changing, right? Something new is happening. And that's going to allow you to work towards, obviously, this improved compression and ball flight that everybody's chasing. This is why, to me personally, this is a far more important fundamental to the golf swing than like having the ball position in the exact same spot as every other golfer, because that's not something that I personally consider a fundamental. So you're going to set up to the ball. We're going to try to hit one here. You should see an exaggeration where I hook the ball quite a bit. And basically, I'm going to go to the top of my backswing, and then I'm going to apply that force on the way down. I used to tell people it's almost like revving the engine of a motorcycle, right? If I'm like doing something like this. I know that's not always the case. Sometimes it's the inverse, but you get the idea, right? I'm really curling the knuckles under the forearm. So think of that revving of the engine. And then I'm going to set up to the ball. I'm going to go to the top. Obviously, there's a timing component to this, so it won't be perfect right away of trying to create that feeling on the way down. And then I'll hit one, and if I do this really well, I should, in theory, hook the ball quite a bit. So again, I did something that helped me to shallow the club a lot. I did something that helped me to close the club face. This is quite possibly as extreme as you can do. Obviously, for me, it's really easy to exaggerate that feeling, so I can get that going really hard to the left when I'm doing it. I can't imagine it's going to be the case for many of you, but it's a good sign. So I have the numbers on the screen in front of me. Club path at 6.5 to the right. I actually exaggerated the club face so much it didn't even necessarily capture it. 120 feet of curve to the left. That is 40 yards of curve to the left. Think about how extreme that is, but how beneficial, right, if we associate a positive to this, that this is going to be for somebody whose tendency is to curve the ball too far right. Don't freak out if you do this. It's going to be a lot harder to do it on the golf course, so you probably won't exaggerate it as much. But this is basically what I want to see a lot of you start to do. If you have to change your grip type to match it eventually, those are things that you can consider in the past. But get that lead wrist working towards a flat position on the way down. You'll get rid of that slice and you'll create so many good habits in your golf swing that are going to be beneficial for you long term.